Here we go. Should be coming through now. G'day, Peter. It's good to see you again. Things are obviously starting to get a bit more interesting with the campaign now that we know that some normal campaigning can resume from next week.
Yeah.
But also interesting to watch Glenn Cooper's show last night, Tuesday night, with a few new candidates there. So I think as we go, we'll start to invite other candidates and other guests to come and join us for our conversation. So it's not just the two of us talking. Yeah. But I thought today we could talk about values, ethics, and accountability.
Yep, I think that's a great idea, Stephen. It's three values or three things that are very important for candidates to address. And I think for basically residents, voters to understand about each candidate, what are their values and ethics? And how will they be accountable? Because I think we both agree accountability to the residents of Frankston is a very big ticket item.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely spot on there. And interestingly, the Frankston Council currently holds its closed decisions, makes closed meeting decisions 28% of the time, compared to the average for similar councils, which is only 8.58%. So there's a massive difference. There's like 20% more decisions are made in closed meetings at Frankston compared to everywhere else. And it just doesn't, to me, it doesn't speak to transparency.
Look, it doesn't. I agree with you. It's a nonsense, in fact. I mean, this reminds me of, I don't know, governments at different levels or organisations saying, no, the public can't know about this because it's commercial in confidence or it's something else. Now, sure, I agree that some things are, but for a council to have 28%, I noticed that as well, 28% is just enormous. That's, we're not far off a third of, a third with 28%. Yeah. So it can't be the case. And I think what that word transparency sort of bobs up in my mind. It's not transparent at all. A lot of things that are happening, unfortunately. So that's something to be changed. These things need to be looked at. And if it's going to be closed session, it has to be defended as to why it is. It's not defensible, 28% and nothing said.
Yeah. And look, I just want to make clear sort of the difference of my understanding of the difference between values, ethics, and accountability.
Yeah.
I think values are very much kind of internal behaviours that drive the things that you think about. They're the motivations. They're I suppose, the principles that underpin your decision making throughout your life. Whereas ethics is more around as a kind of more formal framework that you might work within, and you use that to inform your decision making. And accountability is really about being answerable to people. Do you kind of share a similar interpretation, or have you got a different view on that?
Well, I don't think I do have a different view. I mean, sometimes with you, Stephen, I have to try and search for differences, and often I don't find them. I'll be honest about that. It's interesting with those interpretations you just mentioned. I do agree. Funny enough, I mean, my background is quite open to all. Is from a lot of time in the military and the Navy. In fact, they actually test us. We're tested to see what sort of person we are. I didn't take much notice of that for a number of years, but then I started to look at what the test was saying about me. And since I'm very happy with what they said, I'd share it with anybody. It's a personality type thing. Now, in the sort of the personality type where I won't carry on about it here, but it's actually, the general title is the protagonist. The protagonist. And so I looked it up on the web, as you do, a little while ago, and there's the protagonist with, with the sword in hand, to help people, to basically defend people. So my sort of values come from a sense of wanting to help others, that's what a friend of mine who's very much a psychologist and in this, I said, test me, see what it actually conformed with that sort of thing. And ethics, she said, oh, blah, blah, blah. And ethics are very high, you know, in that sort of personality type. And I thought, that's interesting. I said, oh, isn't that interesting? I won't say what my personal email address is here on this show, but you know it. Ethic is actually one word in my email address. And I thought, it sort of struck me. I thought, well, isn't that interesting? But ethics to me are how you proceed. You have your underlying values, as you said, and your ethics are how you proceed. And ethics have a great bearing on how you act in your own self-interest as opposed to how you act for the interest and the good of all.
Yeah. Look, I think that's a really good point, and maybe we'll come back to talk specifically about our respective values in a minute and the kinds of values we'd expect to see applied within local government, particularly our local government in Frankston.
Yeah.
But I think there's a really important point around the ethics piece as well, because it's also about the decisions you make and the things that you do when nobody's watching you.
Yes.
And actually, I think that's what really defines whether somebody is truly ethical or not, is what you do behind closed doors as much as what you do when you're on public show.
Yeah, for sure.
So look, maybe we'll talk a bit about values, and then we'll talk a bit about what the ethics are and where we think we can improve ethical practice at Frankston Council.
Yeah.
You know, for me, a lot of the work that I've done over the last 15 years has really been steeped in values and ethics, because it's about helping people in times of crisis.
Yes.
But you know, I've kind of reflected quite a bit around the values piece in the lead up to this campaign. And for me, I've tried to kind of summarize it in sort of 5 core values that I would like to kind of bring into the discussion and bring into Frankston Council. First one being around transparency. And I think we've already touched on that one. You know, I think we should be as transparent as possible. We should be looking for reasons to be transparent about what we do and what we say, rather than looking for reasons to not be transparent, because we're there. You know, if we're on council, we're there as part of being in a public office, and everything we do should be, you know, the default position should be transparent. The other thing I think is about leadership, and I know you'll have had some experience of this yourself through your naval service and also the work that you do at the TAFE. But the you know, authentic leadership is not about pretending to be something else. It's about actually bringing who you are as a person, I think, into that leadership space. And it doesn't matter whether a councillor is the mayor or the deputy mayor or just a councillor, you're in a leadership position. And I think you've got to be very authentic about who you are and what you bring to the table in terms of leadership. And I very strongly believe that leadership is about, I talk a lot at work about the idea of servant leadership. So you're offering leadership as a service to others, rather than it being something which is about taking or being visible all the time. It's often about pushing others to the front as well. And then the other 3 for me, one's about integrity, you know, and again, that comes back to what you do privately as well as what you do publicly. Humanity, which links very much to the work that I've done in the last 15 years, which is about sort of recognizing the intrinsic worth of every individual in your community. And that doesn't matter whether it's a resident or a business owner, but it's about having a council that kind of recognizes that humanity in people when they're dealing with their challenges or providing services. And the last one, which I think that is really vital coming into the next council period, for the next 4 years, is the one of collaboration, which I think is one of the critical ones that we've been missing so far. I don't want to dwell on the past. I think it's about moving positively forward. But you know, those are the 5 values that I want to bring to the table. What are yours, Peter?
Yeah. Look, there's a few things you've touched on there, and I'm glad you gave some examples of you know, what you've been doing, Steve. And I think that's very important for people to know about candidates too. I mean, I'm not saying you can't have any walk of life and, you know, be a good counsellor. That's possible for sure. But it's almost like a job interview, isn't it? You know, how have you demonstrated these things in your past life? And well, you have or you haven't. And it's about how much faith people can have that you'll bring certain things forward and to the table when you're on council. So I'll touch on a couple of those titles that you mentioned. Maybe I'll go to leadership first. It's something I know a little bit about. There's a few interesting stories there. Just a couple of things really quickly, which might indicate how I feel about leadership and how I've been guided.
Yeah.
I know that down at the, when I first, not long after I first joined the Navy, so I joined as a naval officer, and I was down at Service Day, the management school in the Navy. And it's a misconception to people, I think, to think, oh, well, in the military, people just bark out orders all the time. We had a naval commodore came into the management school and he said to us, now, I hope you people don't think that you can just go out there and bark orders and you'll be a leader. It's not the case at all. You need to show real leadership. So it's your example. You need to have an affinity with the people who you work with and for, and you need to bring them into the decision-making process. So you need to be able to get on with people, which leads on to the being a united council, if you like, and getting on with each other. The council, it's absolutely essential. I mean, we don't want to waste time and money on petty things, and I won't talk about examples, that's dwelling on the past. What I'm saying is in the future, we need to absolutely be accountable to the residents and not waste money on petty squabbling. That's just not a good use of time or money. It ends up being money. So it's very important to be united. Leadership is important too. If you've got to, besides other councillors and dealing very professionally with those other councillors in a collegial sort of way, collegiality is very important in council. Respect is important, but residents too. You've got to bring residents along with some decision making. If you think something's correct and it's right and what you should do, you can't just implement it. You need to go out, reach out, community consultation, and get a feel for what the community thinks. Now, if you think, oh well, that didn't go the way I wanted it to, what I've got. If you can't convince the community that this is something's a good idea, if you can't bring the community with you, well, then you shouldn't do it. And you should have the leadership qualities and the collegial qualities with residents as well to bring them along.
I mean, I think one of the really important aspects of that as well is that being a unified council doesn't necessarily mean you don't have disagreements, and it doesn't mean that you don't have debate. But I think once the council makes the decision, you've got to move forward as a united front in terms of that decision. And if I think about quite good, really good youth leadership focused initiatives like the Young Mayors program that was killed off a couple of years ago. If I look through the history of that, 1 month council votes to kind of reaffirm their support for that.
Yes.
And then not long after, they're voting to get rid of it. I mean, it's just utterly inconsistent, and it doesn't feel like a very values-based decision-making process.
And we know what happened in between. There was probably big arguments, and some stronger-willed person got their way. Who knows? That's my guess, because that's what happens. Now it's interesting. I'm glad you brought up that bit. You have to have vigorous discussions. On the board, I'm on the board at Chisholm Tape, and we have vigorous discussions. We have vigorous discussions, debate, but we're always polite, and we let people have their turn. We put our point of view forward. You can do that without squabbling. You can do that in a collegiate way with respect for each other. Now, in the end, as you say, I absolutely agree. A decision is made by the council. That is the council's decision or the councillor's decision. Okay, and that's it. Then you can't be sort of going out there white-handing people, doing all those bad practices. It's a corporate responsibility, and that's what we have to remember with the current council. They have to take corporate responsibility for the decisions made. And so I was that councillor who said this and carried the day. No, it's a corporate responsibility. So yeah, I agree.
And look, I just want to come back to the transparency and accountability piece as well, because we've got a couple of comments that have popped up. One is around Oliver Hill, who's candidate for the West Ward, has
great guy. Can I just say?
He's a great guy, yeah, and definitely nobody's puppet. But Oliver Hill has sort of asked about park, and if you look through the council agendas and the council minutes, almost every report or every decision to do with park is held behind closed doors. Right?
Not right.
But it is a council owned, it's a ratepayer owned asset. It's a community asset. Surely we should have greater visibility about what's going on with respect to park, the park staff, the finances that sit behind it, and so on. It is a fantastic facility. I'm a member down there myself. Haven't been for 6 months, but I want to know as a ratepayer, let alone as a council candidate, about how well that's being managed or not. And there's no visibility over it whatsoever.
Not at all. And I'm pleased Oliver's brought that up, because I was a member too, and I actually about 3 or 4 months ago I stopped. I might start again in the future when the pandemic's over, but it almost makes me suspect I've actually met Oliver in the sauna down there, because I've had discussions in the sauna. Was that you, Oliver? Maybe not. But exactly those things were discussed. And let's have a look at the books. Let's have it such that if somebody writes to council and says, I'm a bit concerned about this, and there's a couple of things I've been concerned about down there. How about if something's written, a concern is written to council, council answers it. It belongs to the council. Okay, they have a body that manages it, takes care of the whole thing. I know people have written to council in the past and they've said, oh, well, sorry, that's actually not us. You'll have to go off to that other body. Well, I don't think that's good enough. I think the inquiries should be handled by the council, and they should go off on their behalf. Now, I won't say too much. I'll just simply say, as a microbiologist, I've had some concerns, and I won't say any more.
Yeah. Okay. Great. I'm a little bit concerned about your deal making in the sauna. But
what happens? Sauna stays in the sauna. Steve.
Okay. All right. But look, I mean, more seriously though, I think when things are hidden from view, it can create a perception of either a conflict of interest or influence, or things that are not willing to be shared because they might be uncomfortable. And I think one of the real challenges, both from a kind of accountability perspective, but also from a kind of ethical and values perspective, is it means that sometimes you're going to have out in the open things that don't feel comfortable.
That's right.
And that's part of being in public office.
I absolutely agree that if you don't answer things, if things are hidden away, where's the books? Is it profitable or not? How profitable is it? Now, members there have been asking questions, and the both members of Park who live in Frankston mostly, almost exclusively, and other residents, even if they're not members, everybody should know what's going on. Maybe it's a hugely profitable thing. Well, maybe that's a good thing. I think it's pretty reasonably priced and all of that. I don't have big problems with that. But well, what's the problem with bringing it all out in the open? I mean, if it was well profitable, in normal times, well, that's a good thing. Why would we want to hide that? So as you say, questions are asked. If they're not answered or hidden away, or it's all too difficult, there is a bit of a lingering smell at times, and nobody wants that. Just be transparent, face the music.
I mean, I don't know if you heard this saying in when you were in defence, but in my line of work, one of the things we talk about is this idea that a lack of information leads to assumption, and the assumptions are almost always negative. So it's better to have things out there and visible. And sort of Greg Marshall, who's somebody I know who lives in the Langwarrin area, he's asking about, well, how did they make the decision about rates? The budget was approved at a point where we knew we were in pandemic. Langwarrin doesn't feel that it's getting its fair share necessarily, but you would think that there would be a much more open discussion about why a decision was made. And again, we don't want to talk about the council that we're dealing with now, but rather going forward.
Yeah.
I think there needs to be greater justification, which can be challenged by people quite legitimately. But people like you and I, if we were on council, should be able to stand there and say, this is the decision we make. We know that some people disagree with us about that, but this is why it was made. Or we're able to say, well, this is the decision we took, and it's great that everyone agrees with it. But it strikes me that the discussion's just not happening around that. And if we're going to have integrity, and if we're going to really embrace collaboration, we actually need to involve our community in those discussions.
Well, we do. I agree with you. What happened with the council rate rise was suddenly people got bits of paper in their letterboxes, and there it was, a rate rise. Now, we've talked about getting out of the coronavirus problem, economic problems. Now, we know what our stances are. You know mine and I know yours. They're reasonably similar about rate freezes, etc. Now, we would have to be upfront, open and honest about that. And if we decide, because we might be questioned by people who question that judgment and say, oh, look, well, you've got to make your books balance. How are you going to make your books balance? We will get those questions. And we have to be not afraid to answer them. But the first thing is to be upfront, open in what we would do. And with rate rises, well, it's an old chestnut of all residents. Why are my rates going up? Well, instead of just doing it, how about explaining it? I would have preferred to explain to others why the rates weren't going up, which would have been my stance. And I would have been happy to explain that to them. And I would have been happy to talk about detail, the economic detail and the budget details of that. And I'd probably be happy to talk about where the savings were coming from to be able to do that. And also a little bit of, around sort of budgeting in these times and getting out of COVID, etc. So it wasn't done. It should have been done. That's unfortunate. In the future, I think we've got to be prepared to stand up behind our decisions and consult about them.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to that value of integrity, but also about how we collaborate with our community as well. Lydia Wheeler's just put up a comment, which I think is quite pertinent to that, is that council does put the budget out for discussion.
Yes.
And I can, it was a long document. It was very dry, but it's a very sort of passive consultation. I think that actually, particularly given the tools we have access to today, is actually reaching out into communities and into households to have very participatory collaboration and consultation is actually quite critical. Particularly if you believe in the idea of sort of open democracy and open government, then surely local government should be the most open of all of them.
Yeah, I agree, and I appreciate Lydia's comment. It does go out now. Sometimes, I'm used to looking at budgets down on the board, a lot of pages, and you go through them and you pick up things here and there. A lot of people aren't, this is not a put down. Some people can fly aeroplanes and I can't. And it's a matter of what you're used to doing and what you're practiced at. There's a lot of people who would, the budget papers are out. Well, what's that mean to me? I can't really read it. Yeah. That's not a put down of anybody, as I say. Before 10 years ago, I would never have thought I could look at a complex budget and do it. Although probably 20 years ago, I was at the Defence International Training Centre and had a $6 million budget to control then. And that was cross country votes. So, you get used to these things, but it's only because of that background you can do it. I think meaningful consultation is a word I know and a phrase I know. And, where I am, we talk about meaningful consultation quite a bit. You can't sort of throw something out, this is the budget, and this is what we're going to do. Meaningful consultation is understanding points of contention that might arise later and explaining it to people and saying, look, here's something, it's a contentious thing, but this is the reasons we're doing it. And I appreciate that budget papers are out. I think that's a great, I wouldn't change that for sure. Yeah. But the ability of people to go through and interpret it. Now, contentious issues, well, I think rate rises are always a contentious issue. So that
Yeah, and I,
on
and I think in particular when that is off the back of year after year surpluses as well,
that.
it
Yes.
starts to, as actually we've flipped into a crisis, and so therefore we need to act differently and rethink what those norms might be. But again, doing it from a basis of values and ethics,
Yes.
and accountability.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely agree. If we don't do it that way, well, what are we doing? We're doing it perhaps something that's not quite as ethical as it should be. Not quite as professional. We need to include all those concepts. So I agree. We've just got to highlight things that might be contentious and explain.
Yeah. So Greg Marshall's just asked about, council using funds to support volunteer groups in the near future. So, for example, the Scouts, Guides, Lifesaving, SES, CFA, and so on. I think that again, there is the issue around transparency and accountability, and part of that community collaboration piece again around how local government, or how Frankston Council more specifically, provides support to all of those kind of service organisations, those volunteer groups, and so on. And whilst you might have an assumption that a lot of those are should be state funded, what sort of role is there then for local government to play in terms of supporting those kinds of groups as well?
Yeah. Well, look, with that one, I know there's a couple of, there's state government and there's council. Now, it's at the moment, it's a little bit like being in opposition and saying, how much would you spend? We can't go to much detail. We don't have the books. We don't know where we can make savings. There's a fair bit of state government involvement in this as well. And I know through local members who I know, and I know being able to deal with state government in a sort of a way which will encourage them to help us out here in Frankston. I think we've got a lot of opportunity for that. So we advocate for Frankston. We advocate to get sort of state funding, for these groups. But we can look at our own budget as well. As I say, we don't know the books yet properly, but I believe in supporting these groups. I believe they are part of community. One of my things is community. Community is such a broad thing. It involves so much, but certainly the groups are. There's sporting groups, and I would say with my background, I also believe in supporting environmental groups and friends of Sweetwater Creek, Friends of Langwarrin Flora and Fauna Reserve. Used to walk there quite a bit. Great place. So across the board. Now, there's more we can do. I happened to run across a council worker the other day who shall not be named, but he was doing the pesticide sort of stuff down Sweetwater Creek way, and I had a good discussion with him about methods of doing these sorts of things. And we talked about the support council could give groups, because I talked to him about that. Yeah. Now, there's a lot of low-cost things that can happen, and it invigorates these groups, whether it's sporting, environmental, it invigorates just to be recognised and get some help here and there. So, it's a very worthy issue.
Yeah, and look, I think that comes back down to that kind of the values piece, is what sort of community, what are the values that are important, not just to us as individuals, but what are the values that are important to the community itself? And we do have a range of different communities within Frankston City. And I think it's very clear to me that, the values that are important to people in Frankston South will be different to those maybe different to those in Frankston North, and different to those in Seaford or Langwarrin or Carrum Downs and so on. But there will be some common features amongst all of those different places. Yeah. And I think it's really important as a councillor and as a local council that you actually engage with those communities in a meaningful way, not a tokenistic way.
Yeah.
So you can actually hear what the community values are, so that you're then looking at that from not just your own values perspective, but also listening to and understanding the values that others are bringing to the table as well.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. And with people, they have their own values, and then you have ethics. And it's at the ethics layer that you start to think about other people's values and the good of the community. And so it's sort of what you were saying, Stephen. I mean, you have your own values, but then you step up to the ethics layer. You've got to take consideration of others in the community, what they think, okay, and what they feel is important to them. I believe in what you said, the differences. There are, I mean, it's just in all communities, a wide community, you get those little pockets of difference. But I at the same time, I think it can be said that some things are put up a little bit higher in some pockets of the community, the wider community, but they don't devalue the other, what other people think are important in other places. They don't say it's not important at all. They just have a different scale of things. So it's listening to those separate pockets of the community, and in certain areas they might want, they have their own priorities, and that's what you've got to listen to, what their priorities are.
And I think that's when you kind of move towards that the ethical piece, which is around, it's not just about doing the right thing and making the right decisions. It's about doing them in the right way as well. And whether you're doing a consultation on whether or not we should have more leash-free dog parks or allow dogs to be in the CBD area or not, if you deliberately set something up so that it skews your results to the position that you want, then it's not necessarily the ethical way of doing it.
Very unethical, I would say. I've seen that sort of thing happen in practice. The survey or questionnaire that's basically weighted to get a certain result back, and some pertinent questions aren't asked, or certain pertinent information isn't given, so that the result is that's wanted. It's manipulation. It's manipulation, and that's why I sort of like to say before, you've got to take people and community along with you, all right? It's a joint decision in a way, or must be at least very informed by the community, because if it's not, you haven't taken them with you. And besides it not being the right and unethical thing to do in the first place, you'll find that it causes trouble down the track. So why do it? From all sorts of reasons,
So Oliver Hill's just come in with a comment saying the amount of reports that come out that you want to do a submission on, but just the sheer volume of it makes it really difficult. And I actually say I agree very strongly with Oliver on that one. Actually, is that you look at the kind of notifications for public submissions are welcome on this issue or that issue, and most of the time you're having to put in a written submission to do it properly and with thought. It does take a lot of time, and you could actually quit your full-time job and just work on council submissions if you're interested. I would like to see, and I think Oliver would like to see as well, is how we actually improve that consultation process, particularly on the big issues. I do think I think the work that's been done around the Frankston 2040 future work, I've participated in a couple of sessions on that, and actually I think that's being done quite well. Obviously, it's still partway or early doors in that process, but I think part of that kind of ethical framework and the accountability piece is about making it easier and simpler for residents and ratepayers and businesses and community groups to be active participants in those consultations as well. There's a very formal way we seem to do things, which is very, I very much take the view that the process that gets in the way of purpose needs to be changed or removed. It's a bit like the whole approach to red tape. If it's not actually achieving the outcome you desire, then is it the right thing to be doing?
Yeah, look, I agree. Sometimes I haven't, there's things that have been dear to my heart, and I just haven't had the time to basically write a big submission and send it in the sense or in a way that I know it'll be taken seriously. It's a lot of work. So there's got to be ways of getting around that. I know, I'll take an example, the Chisholm Institute community, if you like. Okay. And it's certainly got its different characters in different places because it's got different campuses, and you know about campuses too. So you have different places now. Instead of getting people to write a submission in about something, it might be about parking, parking at Chisholm, or it might be about any other number of issues. Instead of doing that, what we do is a consultation process where people can talk, and the main themes, invited to a meeting. Meetings are a couple of different times so that there's opportunity to come along. People come along with their sandwiches, their lunch, they talk. It's a much easier thing to do. And the sense of what they're saying is taken down there. They don't have to write a big submission. And this is like a consultative process that's a lot easier than telling people they've got to, you know, spend an hour after work or some time, or a couple of hours, depending on what it is, writing some big thing in a certain format. That works to some extent. I've got to say that that's something where I think it'd be great to talk about and get people's thoughts on how we can make it easy. I've felt it too. It's difficult, that it's overwhelming at times.
And look, you know, a lot of the work that I've done over the last 15 years has required engagement with communities in different places around the world.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of really good examples of best practice or good practice. I shouldn't say best practice because it's never best, can always get better. But really, you know, there are some good practice examples out there of how you can engage with communities and make it easy for them to engage. Because if you don't make it easy for people to engage, they're not going to take an interest. And this is one of the real challenges I think you have with local government, is that it's one of those areas where as long as my roads are fixed and as long as my rubbish is picked up, you don't think about it most of the time.
Yeah.
So it's really important that you're proactively getting out there. And, you know, it's a characteristic of leadership is about actually communicating with people and engaging with them.
Well, yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. That's exactly what it is. You know, not being remote from people, the opposite from being remote. At the same time, I mean, yeah, as I'm not saying you're saying this, but you don't want to be in people's face. They want to get on with their life, and they want you in council to take care of things in the right way, with ethics, with underpinning values, and in a professional way. That's what they mainly want. And their rates not to go up. But that's what people mainly want, you to get on with the job. But on certain issues, you at least have to give the opportunity to connect. And, you know, some people will connect. If it's too onerous, well, people won't. That was Oliver's thing, wasn't it? Westward, he's a shoe-in. I've told him that.
I just hope he doesn't get wet feet.
Oh, look, he's taking care of a very important area. I certainly acknowledge that bay is a very important area, and I think he'll do a great job. I'm looking forward to working collaboratively, absolutely, with Oliver. Yep.
Sorry, Peter, I interrupted you there, but look, I think, you know, I think certainly my commitment in terms of how I work with you, but also how I work with people, you know, residents and ratepayers in Frankston, is you know, it's, for me, it's about transparency, and that starts, you know, that starts even before now. It's about offering leadership, but as a service, not as something that, it's not about stepping onto a podium or anything like that, but it's about offering the skills that we can bring into the space. Integrity is absolutely, you know, if we say we're going to say something or say we're going to do something, that we actually do it, and remain focused on getting the right outcomes for our community. It's about respecting people. It's about that recognizing everyone as a human being,
Yes.
and treating everyone with respect, even where we disagree. I'm learning an awful lot about that in the social media space at the moment. And then lastly, collaboration. We've got to get a council that comes together and collaborates well, and then from there makes the right decisions and makes them in the right way. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'll give an example of that, which is something I said to somebody once about that. Okay, you can have your vigorous discussions, but you respect each other and you have a common purpose. And my background, I tend to call a mission, and we take the mission very seriously. It is a mission to serve the community. That's who we serve. Now, in a certain organisation I won't name, there certainly had been vigorous discussion, and it wasn't terse; it was respectful. But I think the leader of that organisation was retiring, and I went up to her and I said, "Look, it's been great, and I'm really sad you're leaving." And she said, "Oh, coming from you, Peter, I'm really pleased to hear that." And I said, "Well, of course. Yeah, we've had differences of opinion, but that doesn't matter at all. We did have a common purpose and a common mission." And I gave the example of there was an old show and book called Shogun, and there was the navigator, the pilot who landed in Japan centuries ago and had to find his way around with all the warlords. And suddenly there was going to be a massive invasion, and this is centuries ago, everybody. I'm not talking about now. Massive invasion was about to happen from China. They were about to invade Japan. And the English navigator pilot said to the Japanese warlord, "Well, basically you're done for. You're all squabbling amongst each other, and they've got a massive, number of ships. They're coming over here." And he said, "I'll hold my hand up here," because he said, we have 5 islands. We're 5 islands, and we squabble, or we vigorously debate, probably more warring back then. But as soon as we have some common mission in mind, we come together like a fist, and we have a purpose. We have a purpose. And that's how I think it should be, possibly without shogun swords and things, but you can debate things respectfully, but you've got to come together for the common purpose and the mission, which is serving the community, the Frankston community, for which we are accountable, always accountable.
And that's all about really building a bright future for Frankston. It's about a fresh start for Frankston, really.
Yes.
And I think this is where we need to make sure that, irrespective of whether we're successful in being elected to council, is that even after that, we're reinforcing this piece around values, ethics, having a bit of kind of strategic vision around where we want to go, and really making sure that there's vigorous, respectful debate. But once an outcome is settled on, that's the way we take things forward. There's a few comments. I know we're pushed for time. There's a few comments coming through around the kind of engagement and consultation process, and maybe that actually there's something about community engagement and participation that we could have as another conversation. I'm also conscious that there's an increasing number of candidates who are now starting to stick their hands up to say that they're running across the different wards. I'm quite keen to reach out to them and bring them into these conversations as well. I had one, Sue Baker, contacted me this morning. I've been in touch with Brad Hill as well after his interview. And I know there's a few others as well. But I'd be keen to start bringing in some different perspectives on this as well, if that's all right with you, Peter.
I think it's a great idea, actually. Once again, it's not about, we want to get into council because we think we can do something. But what we need in Frankston is a good, united council, and we want people out there to know who are the candidates and what they think. We're happy to get up and say what we think, but I think I agree, we need to make room for others to give their opinion and they talk about their platform or what they want for Frankston. That's a great thing for democracy at the local level, And I absolutely agree, Stephen. It'd be good to get some other people in here and yeah, for them to have a chat for sure.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Peter. Any final comments from you?
Well, my final comment for today is that we need to cover a lot of ground, and there's a lot of things that has to be said about quite a range of topics and issues. This is one of the most important ones. People values, ethics, and leadership. They're those things, and all those things, the things that they contain. I think that's this has been a very important session to me. I feel it's one of the most important things to talk about.
Thank you for that, Peter. And look, I absolutely agree there that if you don't get the values, ethics, and accountability right, irrespective of what level of government you're working in, irrespective of whether you're running a business or a household, if you don't get those fundamentals right, everything else is built on sand. And I would certainly hope that coming into the next 4 years of council, we've got some really solid foundations there.
Yeah, absolutely. We need to get that right from the start. Yeah.
Great. Thanks very much, Peter. I look forward to our next conversation. I know that we're trying to work on a sort of a Tuesday, Friday cycle at the moment, but I'll be in touch to see when we do the next one. If we start to get others that want to join us in these conversations, we may need to start looking at a third one, maybe a kind of more relaxed Sunday afternoon, maybe, and see if we can fit it in, particularly as we're getting closer and closer to the ballots going out. But look, thanks again for your time. It's always a pleasure talking to you, and I'll be in touch.
Thanks, Stephen. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.